Okay, this week's Sky Cricket podcast being recorded on Monday. That's 2 days before the start of the first day of the first test against West Indies. A 3-match series, of course, first test coming up at Lord's, Jimmy Anderson's farewell test, which is why I'm at Lord's. I think you can see I'm in the Shane Warne commentary box. You can see the great man over my left shoulder there. Great mural we have on the back of our commentary box to commemorate Shane Warne. So I'm here because Jimmy's giving his farewell press conference in about 2 hours' time. So I've come to listen to him. Nass, you're tethered to Chelmsford as ever. How are you?
I'm decent, yeah. I can't make it to Lord's. I've got the electrician. I've got a few electrical issues here in Chelmsford, so I've got the electrician coming. Enjoy, Jimmy. Enjoy the I'm looking forward to the test match. We've had a lot of white ball cricket, which has been good. The World Cup was excellent. We've got some blast cricket going on here in England, but for me, the summer really starts with the Lord's test match. And obviously the emotions of one of our greatest ever cricketers retiring. So looking forward to Lord's and Jimmy's last test.
So you got the electrician in to sort out your floodlights on the tennis court, have you? Our guest, our fantastic guest this week is unique on 2 counts. He's the only guest that we could call upon that likes his company, his own company, more than you, Nass. And he's the only guest we can call upon that I've hit for 6 in international cricket. So Bish, who is sat in the Danubius, I think, across the road from Lord's, got in from the Caribbean yesterday. How are you, Bish?
I'm very well, Nass. Thank you very Nass and Michael. Thank you very much. Sitting across from the ground that you hit me 10 rows back into the stand here for your famous 6 that hustled me into retirement, as I've always said. But it's good. Sun is shining and everything's good.
Let's just start on a somber note, actually. The last time we did a podcast, myself and Nass were sat in Barbados. It was about a week ago. We were just about to fly out, just as the hurricane was kind of barreling its way towards the Caribbean. It looked as though Barbados escaped the worst of it. Not so a couple of the other islands, in particular in the Caribbean, Grenada, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, looked as though they had it bad. What news from the Caribbean, and how was Trinidad when you left it?
Well, to start with, my home island, Trinidad, we largely unscathed, apart from inclement weather, some showers and stuff. Tobago, I think, got a little bit off the edge of it. But when you go further towards the Eastern Caribbean, Grenada, Carriacou, and then up to as far as Jamaica, been hit very, very hard. So I think there's some national disaster areas through the Eastern Caribbean up to Jamaica. And you know, we were in Barbados. I was in Barbados for the edge of it as it passed through, and we were without power for almost an entire day. The hotel that we were staying at had the repercussions of those waves coming into the foyer of the restaurant and stuff. So I can only imagine the horrors of the Eastern Caribbean. Heart goes out to them and hope they get all the aid that they can and need.
Yeah, absolutely. We echo those thoughts, and are going to those who've been particularly affected in a couple of those islands. The last time we saw you was obviously just at the end of the T20 World Cup. Just wanted to get your thoughts on it, actually. I didn't see much of you, but the first time I bumped into you was in St. Lucia, when I saw you getting a quick drink from the bar, and I said, Bish, we've got dinner tonight. Myself and Nass are having dinner at 7:00 tonight. Do you want to join us? And you just looked at me and said, I'll process that, and walked off. And I hardly ever saw you again.
Don't make it sound that bad. I have no excuse, actually. You did say, I think at the beginning of the podcast, that I love my own company. That is true to an extent, but I didn't want to spoil Nasser's dinner because I know he doesn't like unexpected guests, especially when he has no power in his home.
We invited 2 people to dinner. The 2 great commentators, Ian Smith and Ian Bishop, and both of them dissed us on that trip. So
that's more reflection of us than it is of you.
What about the reflections on the World Cup, Bish? I mean, lots of talk and chat about the American aspect, you know, the attempts to grow the game in a new market. Obviously, the Caribbean is an old market. What do you think? First of all, how did you think it went? A very complex logistical arrangement for the tournament across 6 or 7 nations in the Caribbean. How did you think it went? What kind of impact do you think it will have on the medium and longer term on the game in the Caribbean?
Yeah, to be as concise as possible, it was challenging, I'm sure, for the organizers and for the teams and for the media, the broadcast, because of the expanse of territory that had to be covered from the US down to the Southern Caribbean. So, look, I think that has been well documented, how challenging it was, particularly for the players. The surfaces on which it was played were very, very different from what we've seen in some parts of the world with regards to T20 cricket. Very challenging in New York. Dallas, I thought, was very good. Barbados started off a little bit shaky, got better towards the back end with the final as far as run scoring was concerned. But generally, I would agree with the sentiment. It was a bowlers World Cup with no hundreds being scored. We had seam and bounce in the USA, and maybe low bounce and slow pitches largely in the Caribbean, apart from, I would say, St. Lucia. So from that perspective, it provided a different sort of nuance. The pitches in the Caribbean still need to be better. For the domestic guys, you see some of the challenges that they have to learn their technique on. I thought the West Indies were disappointing in the end. If I could just stretch it that far, we started off with a lot of hope in terms of the batting power that the West Indies could produce. And those old habits again, that when the pitch had something in it for the bowling group, they struggled to score off a high percentage of deliveries, which has been an Achilles heel. For many years now, I've spoken about it, and it is still a work in progress. So I'm disappointed, really, from that perspective. And I would challenge every domestic player going forward. West Indian batters will always have power. It is just the nature of the game. But a lot of the teams in the world have caught up with that 6-hitting, boundary-hitting percentage now, and they also have added, the other teams, the ability to rotate strike, to score off more deliveries, and the West Indies still lagging behind in that area.
Keeping with the West Indies and turning our attention to the Test match, it's essentially 2 completely separate teams, isn't it, that West Indies have now? I mean, there's the odd player who crosses over. Shamar Joseph was in that T20 squad, Alzari Joseph, Jason Holder before he got injured. But essentially, West Indies have diverged almost completely between T20 and Test cricket. I make it there's about 13 of the squad, this squad here in England, who were in the part of the Test tour to Australia, which was the most recent Test series that we kind of looked at the West Indies team. What are your hopes, fears for this Test match series coming up, Bish?
You use the word divergence. I don't think it's deliberate. I think it's incidental. The West Indies are very, very challenged with having guys who are very good at T20 cricket, guys like Nicholas Puran, etc. Having them give up the time to play red ball cricket and wanting them in the red ball setup. So I don't think that divergence is deliberate. It is just incidental to the path that so many players have chosen. I thought Australia was indicative to the world that there is still talent in the Caribbean. Whether that talent is raw in the form of Shamar Joseph or 1 or 2 of the younger batters who are able to show flashes of what they're capable of when they are well prepared. My biggest, I wouldn't say fear, because I'm not in the team to be fearful of it, but the concern I have on this tour, once again, is from a batting perspective and how those young group of batters will be able, how often will they be able to put up significant scores with the bat for a talented bowling group to aim at and have something to work with.
It's a comment we make about every touring side, but they feel a bit undercooked, Bish. I mean, they've played the select 11 game, 3-day game. I think Shamar, Joseph and Moti couldn't get over because of the flight chaos, because of the hurricane. So I think Moti bowled 1 over in the second innings. Shamar didn't play at all. Jason Holder, coming back from injury, bowled 8 overs in that game. Going into a test series, back-to-back-to-back test matches. And as you say, batters who want to get used to the Duke's ball moving around. It's a comment with every side, but also because it's not the T20 side, could they have come a bit earlier and played another game?
I don't know how the economics of that work, Nasser, to be honest with you. I think it's an excellent question because when they went to Australia, they had a couple of weeks under Andre Coley, the coach, doing their workout, acclimating themselves. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head how many warm-up games they played, but obviously they were short in the first test match, didn't get past 200, I don't think, in either of the innings. And then by the time they got to Brisbane, they just started grouping a few more scores together. And that's going to be the same mandate here. But England is always one of the most challenging places I have found in my experience. The ball moves around so much more here than perhaps compared to any other part of the world. So I can't answer why more practice games haven't been put on. And I think when you look at this group with Craig Brathwaite, with Jason Holder, for example, in between all of those, you have Mikhail Louis, who has yet to play a test match. You have Athens, who's probably a handful of test matches old. That batting group is so very young that it's going to be a huge challenge for them. What I'm encouraged by, where I don't want to sound like too much of a downer, is the potential of the bowling unit.
Well, we might go on to that bowling unit and then come back to some of those young batters that you talked about. Just to let you know, I mean, I'm sat at Lords, as I mentioned at the start of the podcast. West Indies are training as we speak out on the main ground. I did go out and have a look at the pitch and just bumped into Jimmy Adams, actually, who was saying that before that game at Beckenham, they had an excellent practice time. I think they're at Tonbridge School. I think that's where they were based. And they said the facilities were great and the weather was good. And they had good practice running into that game against the County 11 then at Beckenham. So he sounded as though they felt content or happy with the amount of good weather practice that they've had, which it's not always been easy here in England with the wettest spring and winter since records began. It's been challenging in itself. So the bowling unit, obviously Kemar Roach has pulled out with injury. A couple of questions there, Bish. How much will they miss him? Had he been here, who would have been the bowler to miss out? Because it seems fairly obvious now that it's going to be Jayden Seales, Alzari Joseph, Shamar Joseph, and Jason Holder, with a spinner who we'll come to. But had Kemar Roach been here, which would he have played? Which bowler would have missed out? And how much they're going to miss him? Because he's massive experience, obviously, in English conditions.
Yeah, they're going to miss him badly because he's been plying his trade here in the county championships, as most people know, and with some degree of success for Surrey. He has been able to do, at this late stage of his career, a holding job at worst, even though his powers have started to diminish, as you would expect with everyone in his mid-30s now, but he's still able to do at worst a holding job. And if the ball does a little bit, is where he comes into it in a bigger way. The two Josephs wouldn't have been sitting on the sidelines, I can tell you that, Alzari or Shamar, given the exploits that particularly Shamar had in Australia. Alzari is the man touted to lead this attack in all formats of the game. Jason Holder coming back with his all-round ability. So Jayden Seales might have been the one under the spotlight, even though he's been playing county cricket here and doing relatively well. But he's the guy coming back from injury. He missed the tour of Australia. But that is by the way now, because Jayden certainly comes into it now in a much bigger way, having shown good form. And I just love the way when Alzari gets it right. And, we're looking forward to seeing Shamar, I'm sure. But I'm kind of...
Well, I hope he does okay, because we've done a big program on him that will go out in the middle of the test match on the Friday, I think. Of course, as you know, we went up to Baracara, his village, ahead of the T20 World Cup and had a wonderful trip up there. but we're rather bigging him up. And he was great. We sat down with him in Georgetown. He was absolutely charming and gave us a fantastic interview. We had a lovely trip, but fingers crossed that, he does okay. I mean, it's an amazing story. Obviously, there's been lots talked about him, written about him, but you have to remember, he still only played 7 first-class games, I think, of which 2 of those are the test matches in which he performed so brilliantly in Adelaide and Brisbane. But, I think you have to, you just temper everything with that knowledge that he's still got a tremendous amount to learn, as good and as promising and exciting as he is.
Yeah, that's the message I would put out there. That the guy is young. Steve Smith with his first delivery in Test match cricket gets a 5-wicket haul in his first Test match, and then does the heroics on an injured leg as he did in Brisbane. But he's still going to come up against an England team that are playing Test match cricket, particularly from a batting perspective, in a different way. So it's still going to be a learning experience for him, and that's why I think Alzarri Joseph, with all his experience now, still has to be the guy to shine the torch on whatever that bowling group does. I know Jason Holder is there, but he also missed Australia.
And the unique nature of the ground, which ends would you say suit that 4-man seam attack? I think Jayden played there for Sussex. He got a lot of wickets for Sussex, actually. He didn't get it in that particular game. I think it was pretty flat. But which ends do you see him lining up?
Well, given the slope at Lord's, bowling from the nursery end, I think let me just say you have to be flexible still, because my experience of bowling in Test match cricket and one-day international cricket, apart from the 6 that Michael Afton hit into the stand, the ends didn't really matter to me. I tend to believe you have to adjust, but what is more amenable to your natural shape of delivery with a new ball, Alzarri Joseph will probably say, let me try from the nursery end with the slope going away to the left to get my outswinger going. Maybe later on when he comes back with the older ball, with the slope going the other way, nipping it back. Shamar would probably say maybe the opposite end, the player's pavilion end. Jayden certainly is one that swings the ball away and seams the ball away as his absolute stock delivery. So he wants that end that facilitates the ball leaving the right-handed batter. And Jason Holder is good enough from either end. But I just want to say this once again and reinforce it. You have to be able and to accommodate the wishes of your captain and be amenable to bowling from whichever end and adapt to it.
I was looking at the potential likely 11, Bish. Just tell me whether I'm completely off the mark, close, or what you think the 11 might be. I had Brathwaite, Louis, Mackenzie, Athanaze, Hodge, Holder, De Silva, Sinclair, Joseph, Seals. Does that sound somewhere in the ballpark?
Whose phone is that?
That's
Whose
me.
phone?
Sorry.
Come on, 3 experienced broadcasters. Whose phone?
My phone.
My
My phone. How did that 11 before my phone went off, Bish? How did that 11 sound? Were there any howlers there, or am I close to the mark?
No, as you said it, I thought it might have been your old friend Desmond Haynes calling to tell you, now departing selector, that you were kind of close to the money. And look, Mikael Louis, if he plays, will be the first Kititian to play international cricket. His brother Jeremiah Louis is also in and around the place, so great for them from St. Kitts and Nevis, the federation, where Nevis has produced Stort Williams and Keith Atherton, of course, as we've known now, the smaller of the 2 islands of the federation. So a guy who has played 7 first-class matches or something like that comes to England on that form and opens. Kavem Hodge, I think, is slightly older and much more experienced domestically and has shown great aptitude to the game. As I said before, Alec Athanaze is someone that a lot of the hopes of West Indian batting continue to rest in his young hands. He's been adored and loved by guys like Ashwin and Lara, who've seen him and worked with him in some quarters. Mackenzie is also 23 years of age, and he'll be coming in at number 3 a great admirer of Chris Gayle. So if he does bat for any period of time, you'll see some of those potential characteristics of liking to strike the ball. And then Jason Holder and Joshua Da Silva. So you're not far off. And then we know the bowling group. Kevin Sinclair's.
Sinclair or Moti to spin? Which way will they go?
In England, I don't know if they might just push more for Sinclair's batting ability.
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought.
Because and I'm not sure whether he loves his batting more than he does his bowling, although some people see him as a bowling all-rounder. He will see himself as a genuine all-rounder, if not a batting all-rounder. So that he adds depth to the batting. His bowling still is a work in progress, and then, as you rightly call, the seamer. So you're not far off there at all.
And obviously, you talked about some of the young, exciting batters, but inexperienced and therefore will be hugely challenged in English conditions. What about some of the absent names then? I mean, you mentioned Nicholas Pooran, Shai Hope, who's done brilliantly here in the past, that Test match at Headingley when he got twin hundreds. I mean, is there any chance of these players coming back in towards Test cricket, or is that just a kind of false hope now?
Well, you posed that question, and if I was sitting on one of those sort of chairs that that can move up and down, this certainly would have gone down, because it is still one of the legacies, sadly, of T20 cricket that so many guys, including someone like Kyle Mayers, for example, who have found the red ball game either not fitting into their agenda, their long-term agenda, or they've lost form and been out. Shai Hope in 2017 with those 200s at Headingley. They've asked him to come back. They wanted him to come back, actually, for the tour of Australia, but he said he hadn't played enough red ball cricket, is what I'm hearing, and it really didn't suit his goals to put himself into that spotlight. Nicholas Pooran as well, not a fan at this stage of his career of missing out and playing red ball cricket. And Kyle Mayers, sadly, has lost a little bit of red ball form. So T20 cricket has had a diminishing aspect on several talented players in the Caribbean. I can't blame them. That's their choice. That's where the biggest revenue comes in.
And does that therefore impact upon what's the general standard of first-class cricket like in the Caribbean, across the Caribbean right now?
Well, you asked about the World Cup. First, I think one of the legacies I'm hoping of the World Cup would have been the opportunity to sort of refurbish, I should say, some of the infrastructure, not only of the main grounds, but some of the practice grounds, the practice facilities, which have not always been up to the standard that we as Caribbean players would have liked. So they've facilitated upgrading some grounds around Barbados, around St. Lucia, around some of the other territories, in addition to the international grounds. So I'm hoping that's a legacy, because one of the cries for many years of us in the Caribbean is we need better grounds, we need better facilities, practice facilities, playing facilities, and otherwise to be able to develop our players.
I think the key, as Bish touched on in this whole series, actually, is going to be playing the moving ball. England's record in the Caribbean is not great. And when the pitches have been flat, that Headingley game you mentioned, or good pitches, not flat, I think that they'll get runs, and then that seam attack will test England. So it's getting runs against the moving ball. With all the rain we've had, you're there, Ath. It's going to be a bit of a slow green. There's not going to be much pace in it, but you would expect some sideways movement. And it's a debate, an argument. And I never debated with the great Michael Holding, but it was an argument that I found that, with the more modern West Indies side, it's when it starts swinging around and seaming. He used to say, well, that challenges everyone, Nass. That challenges your England side, Mikey used to say. But I think it just challenges a young, inexperienced West Indies batting lineup more. And it's how they cope with that, Bish, that's going to be the key to this series, I think, personally.
Yeah, that totally agree with that. A young kid who is in Australia and process of elimination will, I so quickly probably point at who it is. But one of the questions he asked me, he's not on this tour actually, he didn't make the cut, but he asked me one of the common questions in how he should prepare if he were to get selected. And we talked a little bit about playing the ball late, which I always found a challenge. The first time I heard play the ball late, I tried it and my off stump went rocking back into the nets before my bat came down. It was too late.
Too late.
But just to come to terms with that whole process of playing late, of not playing with too much, say, of an open bat face, of not trying to hit the ball too square. You can talk about it in theory, and Jimmy Adams is absolutely right in terms of the value of practice time. But until you get out into the middle against quality bowling in a match, as both of you know very, very well, better than most, that's where the real acclimation to unique conditions come in. So going back to the Caribbean again, Nasser, and Michael, a lot of the pitches, not all, but a lot of them are slow, they are low. There have been an effort to try to make them better in the last 6, 7, 8 years, but it is still a challenge as you go deeper into the season to get pitches with bounce, consistency of, let's say, with a new ball, sideways movement, and consistency of that pace and bounce. So it's just a totally different climate when you come here to England. And those guys like Kevin Hodge, who I know practices rigidly with Sam Kernan in, what did you say at describing a ground in the Caribbean some years ago? Rustic is how you termed one or two of the facilities. A lovely little academy, a rustic academy in Dominica. And he does a lot of good work there, but focusing a lot, as he did in Australia, on leaving the ball when he was at Brisbane and scored at half century. Leaving it, make them bowl to him, and being patient enough to force them and wait and then capitalize on it. I think it's going to be the old watch phrase of how they bat here.
And I'll have to bat against Jimmy Anderson, of course. This is his farewell test. I wanted to get your perspective on him, Bish, really. I mean, 41 years of age, 188 test matches, 700 wickets. It kind of defies belief, really, doesn't it?
When Courtney Walsh went past 100 test matches, I thought phenomenal. Glenn McGrath went past it. I thought that would never be reached. And then you have Jimmy Anderson going on just for sheer longevity. His ability to stay fit, I think, is one of the things that put him in a separate dimension. But then his skill and his ability, which I'm a great admirer of, guys who can actually swing and seam the ball in both directions, which is a rare skill I find in the modern game. And to do it with a control of length certainly makes him England's greatest seamer. I would be very, very wary just judging him on the numbers and saying the greatest fast bowler in the game, which I heard from one or two people. It takes more than that. Yeah. But he's certainly up there in the pantheon of the great exponents of seam and swing in the game, particularly in English conditions.
Just before Nas comes in, one question on that longevity. Sometimes it takes one person to stretch the boundaries of the possible and others follow. I mean, you mentioned Courtney Walsh. She was 39, I think, when he finished. Remarkable career. Jimmy's 41. Obviously, he's not an out-and-out fast bowler. He's kind of fast medium, and he's been able to maintain that through a remarkable length of time. Do you think now other bowlers of that ilk, the fast kind of medium swing and seam bowlers, as opposed to the outright genuinely quick bowlers, do you think they will look at Jimmy Anderson and say, well, if he can do it, why can't I go into the 40s? Or do you think he will be an outlier? Do you think he's just kind of a rare specimen, whether how he's built or whatever, and that he's an outlier, and that there's not going to be a whole barrage of medium fast bowlers playing into their 40s in the future?
No, I don't think the floodgates will be open from that perspective, but he certainly has opened my mind and a lot of minds as to how far into your career in terms of age a seam bowler can operate. I remember coming through the system, Nasser and Michael, and I always thought by the time you get to 30, time to pack your boots up and think about succession planning and let someone else come in or you'll be kicked out, right? 30, 31. And now guys have stretched that into the mid 30s and Jimmy into his 40s. But I would think guys will start thinking even more now that, like a Kemar Roach, I can push to my mid 30s, for example. But I think it's slightly more amenable if you're playing in certain conditions rather than having to do it in hot, sweaty conditions and flat pitches. I mean, Sir Richard Hadley went until he was close to 40, didn't he? Yeah. But it was just, he lost a bit about Kapil Dev as an all-rounder, went late as well. But it's a great skill and credit to Jimmy that he is able to do it and still in some way be able to do it with control across conditions.
The actual narrative, Bish, maybe, should he be carrying on? You know, yeah, he just played at Southport, got 7 for spit, bowling beautifully, looked like he'd have great rhythm. You could imagine him turning up to Lords and bowling well and getting wickets and be on the verge of going past Shane Warne. What do you think about England's decision and the timing and the general point? If you are an all-time great, as you say, he might not be the greatest fast bowler, he'd be in the pantheon of top 3 or 4, but when you're that good and that great, should you just go out at the top? You know, people asking why as opposed to why not. What do you think of timing of retirement?
I love that, the way that you phrase that, leave people asking why and why not. If I may just go back to Michael's World Cup, I was so happy that Virat Kohli in particular says, that is my last T20 international. Because you want to remember a great player. Well, certainly I do. I want to remember a great player leaving with a burst of excellence rather than seeing him, whether a bowler or a batter or whatever, dragging it on, and people saying, why is he still here? So with Jimmy Anderson and the way that Curtly Ambrose left as well, it's always a wonderful feeling, whether he reluctantly moves on or he was sort of given the nudge to say, I love the way that I remember the last image that I had of player X performing to a high level rather than someone dragging it on. And it depends on the structure of your team. If we go back to Shamar Joseph, when I started, I came in and in my second test match, there's no comparison, huh? This is only the principle. I got a 6-wicket haul in my second test match, first completed test match. But I didn't feel the burden of having to do that every game because I had Marshall, Walsh, Patterson, a young Ambrose, who were the headline acts. So I could just continue going about low profile my work. Shamar Joseph has come in and now there's no Kemar Roach. So he's going to feel even more of a burden to be a star player. So he has to control that. And similarly with Jimmy now, I think he would have done a great job of teaching the other guys coming through the system. But now I think I wouldn't disagree with the timing. Now other guys have a chance to spread their wings before whatever big series down the road and develop their game. You can't go on forever. That's what I would say. But the timing of leaving, hopefully he doesn't get a single wicket against the West Indies match here at Lords. But I don't think we're far removed from seeing in his previous series what an excellent bowler he has been and still can be. No wickets, Jimmy.
And he's going to finish here where it all began under you, Nass, of course, 21 years ago. When his first over went for 17, didn't he? You didn't give him a fine leg. What kind of field did you give him? A young 20-year-old.
Sorry for backing the greatest England bowler of all time that was swinging it round corners at Lords. I mean, I threw him into a complete state of frenzy. He looked at me. I haven't got a fine leg. Well, that doesn't mean you have to run up and bowl 2 yards outside off stump. He went for 7. He didn't speak to me before that, and he hasn't spoken to me since. So he's a bit like Bish, actually. Great outswing bowler, quick enough, angry, doesn't say a lot, a little bit shy. There are some good comparisons with Ian Bishop in Jimmy Anderson, definitely.
Okay, what do we think England's team's going to be, Nass? I wrote it down as Crawley, Duckett, Pope, Root, Brooks, Stokes back bowling again, of course, Smith on debut. Then I had Wokes, Anderson, Bashir, Atkinson. Does that sound about right, or?
You've given Jimmy a promotion there, by the way.
Well, no, he's going to be number 11, clearly. But what about that team?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Wokes' record. Wokes is a bit undercooked for personal family reasons. His dad passed away recently, so he's not played much. He's come into the Warwickshire side fairly late, but his record at Lords speaks for itself. So that looks about right. That's a lot of batting if you have Wokes at 8, who has a Test 100 at Lords. Jamie Smith on debut as a batter. I think that is a phenomenal selection. I just love the way he goes about his work as a batter. He fits in perfectly with the style and brand of cricket that this England side want to play. And that's another question for Bish in a minute, actually, as with Australia and the reaction to Australia when England went about their work. So I think that looks a very good side. I think there's some young, talented players in there, but also a lot of experience. Bish, will they be ready? The West Indies, we saw Pat Cummins immediately have a deep point and have defensive fields for England. You can imagine England going hard and the captain going to have to react to that.
Yeah, I think is sort of one of the things I'm looking forward to in this series is seeing, I don't want to use the term baseball, but for want of a better expression, I'm going to regurgitate that here, seeing it up close and personal. And how this West Indies bowling group reacts to batters who are playing Test cricket a different way. I'm not sure that I could ever have envisaged seeing batters going as hard as often as England have done in this red ball format of the game. So that'll be a big challenge for the two Josephs, for Jaden Seals, for Jason Holder, in that I think you still have to pick your moments, because guys going hard will give you opportunities, but they will also put you on the back foot quite a lot. And then you're going to have to hold your composure, because you'll fly away for a few boundaries at different times quite frequently. But how you hold your composure and your character to come back. And then knowing, as Craig Brathwaite will understand, when do I set the field back? When do I just do a little bit of a defensive job and still be looking for wickets in that period? So I think that's going to be fascinating. West Indies bowlers are going to be under some pressure, but I think it's a quality or potentially a good enough bowling attack to create some opportunities.
And England, more importantly, I mean, they're sitting 9th in the World Test Championship. Now, sometimes tables do lie. They've last 10 Test matches have been against Australia and India away. It doesn't get much tougher than that. The two sides that were in the final of the World Test Championship cycle last time round. They've got West Indies 3 tests, Sri Lanka 3 tests. For all the chat on Bazball, and we've appreciated the way they've gone about it, it is a very, very important 6 test matches coming up.
Yeah, they want to get off the bottom and start winning some games. It feels like a little bit of a reboot to me at the halfway stage. It's exactly halfway through Brendan McCullum's 4-year contract as an England coach. First 2 years, I think it's gone pretty well, even despite where they sit in the World Test Championship. I think, and the team is in a better state than it was when they took over. And obviously, they played some very exciting and interesting cricket in that time. But as you say, the reality is that they didn't win the Ashes. They got beat in India, and they're sitting at the foot of the World Test Championship. So, but it feels like a bit of a reboot in the sense that they've moving Anderson on. Looks like they've moved Ollie Robinson on. They've moved away from Johnny Bairstow, bringing Smith in and revamping that bowling attack with what's to come. So let us see what the summer holds. It should be a fantastic occasion here on Wednesday. Wednesday starts unusual, normally Thursday for Lords. It's going to be Jimmy Anderson's last test. It's a really exciting West Indies bowling lineup in particular. I think that we're going to keep our eyes on, and we're thrilled to have Bish with us for the summer. So thanks very much for joining us, Bish. Myself and Nass will be dining tomorrow night. You are very welcome to join us. I'll leave the invitation open. I don't expect an RSVP in the positive, but you're always welcome, and it's great to see you with us this summer. And thanks very much for joining us.
See you Wednesday morning, basically, Bish.
You never know, I might show up, but just tell Jimmy for me, I'm glad he came. I'm really happy that he came and he's left a mark and something for others to follow. Thanks for having me.
Cheers,
okay,
Bish.
And I'll catch up with you, Nas, on tomorrow night or Wednesday, and our next pod will be at the conclusion of the Lord's Test, and we'll see how the game pans out.